No worries, no worries.
Because I know, can you see that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, I do classes every so often. We're trying to sell our condo and we're trying to move. But I know that my wife and daughter are fixing to come in from the store in just a little bit, and they will be noisy.
All right. I know how that is.
Okay. We're good to go, bud.
All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome back again. This is Stratton J. Davis back for the second time with another interview with a former major leaguer. This time I have with me Mr. Randy McGilberry, who pitched for the Royals in the late 70s. Mr. McGilberry, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, man. Doing great, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm Randy McGilberry, Kansas City Royals 77, 78. I grew up in their minor leagues. Well, I say grew up. I was in the big leagues 2 years after I signed. But I grew up in a little town just north of Mobile called Saraland. And I had a dad that was just very athletic. And we, when you're growing up in the 50s and 60s, you played outside. There wasn't no stuff going on inside. We didn't really have anything inside to do it unless it rained and we watched TV. But my dad was very athletic, and we played everything from croquet, badminton, kickball. Dad wasn't a basketball guy. We didn't have a goal, but we played baseball. We played everything in the backyard, and football. I could throw a football with a lot of folks. I just wasn't real good when I had 200-pound guys chasing me. But we grew up in a sports family. My sister was as good as we were up until she realized she was a girl. But we had a very athletic family. My mother could play. My dad could play. My mother would get out there and throw with us. But my dad would come in from Alcoa. They had a bauxite plant in Mobile. And he'd come in every day at 3 o'clock. And he'd say, "Get your cap, son, get your glove, and let's go pitch." I pitched every day of the week. And it really wasn't pitching as much as it was. I had to throw after I warmed up and he said, "Okay, we're going to start." I had to throw 10 strikes before I could stop. If I threw a ball, I had to run around our little, I think, 800, 900 square foot home. But I had to run around the yard and come back and start over. And as much as I hated running, I got real good with the strike zone. So that was, my dad saw something in me, and he drove me harder than he drove my older brother or my younger brother. And but he saw something in me, and he knew he could push my buttons. But I was very competitive. We all were. When it rained, we played cards, and it was competitive. I mean, it was go for the jugular between family members. So competition wasn't anything new for me, and confidence in what your abilities were was nothing new for me. So when I was growing up in that little town of Saraland, we played. I didn't have a pair of cleats till I was probably about 10 years old. I played barefooted on them old red clay fields, and one was right there on the main highway by the police station where our little team played. And it was called the Mobile Touchdown League. And they would hand you a bag of that had catcher's equipment in it, about 3 or 4 bats, and a dozen baseballs, and then some used ones for practice, and then some helmets. Outside of that, that's all you got. And everything else, I played in cut off blue jean shorts, T-shirts, and barefooted. So I did that for about my first 2 years, and then Dad finally bought me a pair of rubber cleats, and we had those old thick gray flannel uniforms, and that was even what the pros used back in those days. And we moved to a little town closer to Mobile called Chickasaw. And my dad heard that Dixie Youth was being played in a town just, it just, I don't know, maybe a half a mile from us. And if you didn't have Dixie Youth or Dixie program in your city, you could go to the closest city and sign up with them. And so my dad signed me up at 12 years old for Dixie Youth. And that was the first time I'd ever had a losing season. We lost. I think we won 4 or 5 ball games and lost about 7. And it was a wide open, an awakening for me, because those kids had been playing ball together for years and I was brand new. And my dad took a team, and naturally all the other coaches had all the studs. So my dad took what we had and we got out there and played. At 12 years old, I was pretty dejected. But at 13, I went to junior high school in those days. And back then, seniority meant something. And a 7th grader, he didn't play. He just had a uniform and he got to sit the bench.
Yeah.
But I had to do all the practices and all the running and stuff. I was probably as good a pitcher in those days as most of the guys that were in the 9th grade. But I didn't get to play. And when I was 14, I was a starting pitcher. I didn't lose any games. When I was 15, I started in the 9th grade, didn't lose any games. And then I went on to high school and did real good. But then the racial issues started in 1970. And the school that I was at was the borderline of the black neighborhoods and the white neighborhoods, and there was always problems. And you know how bad it got.
Yeah. So
in all that, we transferred back to Saraland, or moved back to Saraland, and I attended Satsuma High School, which is where I grew up or graduated from. So when I graduated, I'd won 12 games, and we lost. We had a guy that I won either 12 or 13 games, and one of them, I believe, was a playoff game. But we lost a playoff game that kept us out of the state. We would have won state if I'd have been pitching. But my coach, he was one of those guys that, okay, you're going to pitch Monday, I'll pitch him Friday. Man, I could pitch every day of the week. It didn't bother me. But anyway, we didn't win the state, but we won the county in Mobile. And while I was pitching one night, there was a guy that was sitting in the stands that had come to see another ball player on the team that had filled out an application to Louisiana Tech, and he wanted to go into engineering, but he wanted to know if he could play baseball there. So the coach came over to watch him. Well, I happened to be pitching that night, and it wasn't anything for me to strike out anywhere from 10 to 16 guys every time I pitched. So I struck out, I think it was either 15 or 16 guys that night. And the coach was there to see he was my second baseman. And he was there to see him. Well, he got him and he stopped him for a minute and he said, wait just a minute. And then he said, call Randy over here too. So we were both invited to go to Louisiana Tech and just tour the campus and, do the little dog and pony show. So Gravy Patterson was the guy's name. And Phil and I rode over there. Phil Willingham was the guy's name that played with me. We both got full scholarships to Louisiana Tech. And we both went to college together. We both played together at Louisiana Tech. And my freshman year at Louisiana Tech was probably the best season I'd ever had, because my first game to pitch in college was against Ole Miss Rebels. And, they were the defending SEC champs in '73. We started out with them. And basically, what I did is we'd gone through and played Delta State on the way to Ole Miss. Delta State kicked our butts in 2 games, a doubleheader. And I didn't think it was ever going to be over. Those guys were killing the ball. So we get on the bus. We head to Ole Miss, and I got the first game of the doubleheader. And I get out there. The wind's blowing in, thank God. The wind was blowing in at Ole Miss, and Jake Gibbs had recruited me very highly. He wanted me to sign, but they wouldn't give me a full ride. And so I said, well, I can get a full ride. And Mississippi State, the same thing. So anyway, I get on the mound, and I'm throwing the ball pretty hard. They stroked the pill. Now they had a good ball team, and they were hitting the ball, but my defense was superb. I pitched a no-hit shutout against Ole Miss, and then the game right behind me, Eddie Holman, left-handed that signed, I think, with Texas out of Tech, he pitched a 1-hit shutout against them. So we shut them out, and they were the defending SEC champs. And we go back to Louisiana Tech, and I was in, I guess you'd call it like a 2-year degree program. And I went to my professor, and we were talking about the game and everything. And he said, oh, by the way, you helped me win a dinner. And I said, how's that? And he said, I told my daughter you were going to beat Ole Miss. She went to Ole Miss. She was at the ball game. She called her dad. As soon as the game was over, she went back to her dorm and called her dad and told her, said, well, I owe you dinner. Well, he told me, he said, well, here's the thing. He said, I've seen your work. He said, I've seen what you do. And he said, you're precise. And it was drawing, mostly mechanical drawing and things of that nature. For the first quarter of 1973, I didn't even go to class. I didn't. He said, you turn your work in, I'll grade it. And then you make your corrections if there are any, and we'll go from there. Well, I made an A in that class. But that was, I pitched another no-hitter against Northeast that same year. But I had rivaled most of the pitchers there and most of the pitchers in the Southland Conference, I believe is what it was called. So I'll tell you, when I was in high school, the Mets drafted me in the 5th round, and they offered me $21,000 in the rest of my college, and I turned it down. I didn't like the Mets, number one, but it wasn't anything to do with any particular Met. It was just I didn't like their program. And Nolan Ryan is one of the guys that was young, and some of his statements in the reports, he didn't care for the Mets too much. So I just I bypassed that because there was 2 reasons why. One, I wanted to get my education, and 2, I wanted to make sure that I didn't sign pro and miss out on the college experience if I wasn't good enough to play pro ball. So I wanted to take advantage of my scholarship. And that way I found out, can I pitch at this level or not? If you go back and look at the 73 schedule for Louisiana Tech, man, we played some bodacious schools. A&M, Arkansas State was in that thing. We played Ole Miss, Delta State. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks after I got to college, I was homesick and I wanted to go home and play for South Alabama. They offered me a full ride, and I didn't want to stay in Mobile, but I was wanting to go back. My coach pulled out the schedule. It was probably about a 2x3. He held it out and he said, you're going to be pitching against every one of these big college names right here. Nebraska. So I kind of dried my eyes a little bit, and I got to looking at it, and I went, man, that's what I wanted to hear. And from that day forward, I never looked back. And I was probably the best pitcher in the Southland Conference as a freshman. The next year, my coach was not pitching me very much. I wasn't one of the 3 starters. I was like number 4, and I should have been number 1. But he didn't pitch me, and toward the end of the season, I walked into his office and I told him, I said, Grady, I don't know what's going on, but we're going to go to the playoffs because we'd won our conference and everything, and we had got an automatic invitation to the playoffs in Arlington with Texas and I can't think of the name of the other school, but
Actually, that was the question I was going to ask you, because you played at Arlington Stadium, right?
yes, I did.
Was that your first time at a MLB stadium?
Yes.
What was that like getting to pitch there?
Never been to one before.
Wow.
So I'm pitching out there, and I told him, I said, you're going to need me in the playoffs. And I said, if you don't call on me, I'm going to leave Louisiana Tech and go to South Alabama. I said, so you just do whatever you think you need to do, and I'll just follow up on whatever you do. Well, we were playing, I can't think of the school's name. But anyway, we're playing the other team that was in the tournament with it. There were 3. And they called me in for relief. I went out there and saved the ball game. We won our first game. Next game we had was against Texas. We were playing against, I want to say, Rich Wortham, a left-handed pitcher. We were playing against Rich, and he could throw. But we were holding our own. They brought me in relief, and I struck out. I played ball against him. He was the SWC batting champion that year for Texas and for the league. And he played pro ball against me. And I can't call his name. That's sad, too. But anyway, I struck him out twice, and we got a save, and we beat Texas. And the next game we were playing was for the championship to go to the World Series. I started that game. So I pitched 1, 2, 3. I think I pitched either 3 or 4 innings in relief. And then I started on Sunday, and I pitched 5 innings, and then I got relieved. They kind of they started getting to me because I was tired. And but Gary Blaylock was sitting in the stands, and Gary Blaylock was had seen me. And you know, I'd never seen Gary Blaylock, and I wasn't eligible to be drafted, so I didn't worry about scouts and all that. We get through that, we go home, we start the next season. Well, for a long time, and it may still be a record at Tech, I don't know. I don't think so. But I won 12 ball games, and I held that record for the longest time as a starting pitcher. And I did it in my junior year. Well, I had gone and lost a lot of weight because I gained weight at college, and I was still doing good, but I got in good shape. I got down to 195, and I was tight. And I had that 12-win season, and I remember we won the championship again. We went to the playoffs again, and that was when South Alabama was introduced to it. And I knew everybody on South's team. And I had met Gary in Arkansas. We were playing Arkansas State, and it was a real windy day. And Coach got me up to warm up, and I threw 7 pitches in the bullpen. And I went out to the mound after 7 pitches and was throwing full speed. And I think one guy hit a ground ball, and I struck out 2 of the batters. And that was the game. The game was over. And I walked over to the dugout. I was fixing to go grab my jacket and go to the bus. And Coach said, hey, there's a scout with the Kansas City Royals sitting down there that wants to talk to you. His name's Gary Blaylock. And I said, okay. Well, that was the first time I'd met Gary. What a gentleman he was. That's one of the nicest guys I believe I've ever been around in pro ball. He's one of the nicest. I was around a lot of them, but he was one. He was a great mind reader. He knew what was going on. And he said, Randy, my name's Gary Blaylock, and I want to know, you familiar with the Kansas City Royals? And I said, until I met you, I didn't even know they existed. I thought it was the Kansas City A's. He said, no. And I said, I don't watch pro ball. I don't have time. And he said, well, I just want to let you know, the draft's coming up. And he said, we may pick you. You want to play pro ball? And I said, yes, sir, if the money's right. If not, I'll just go my last year of college. Well, we parted ways, went on to the playoffs, and I get back to college. You know the name Wayne Causey?
That name does sound familiar, but I don't know who that is off the top of my head.
Wayne Causey played for the Yankees. He played for the A's, and he played for the Yankees, and he was a second baseman, I believe Wayne was. Wayne's still alive, lives in Ruston. Well, I was working at a plant. I'd already turned the Royals down. They offered me $21,000, the incentive bonus, and college. And I turned them down. I wanted $40,000. So Gary told me, he said, Randy, they just don't pay fifth rounders that kind of money. And I said, well, he said, they've never done it. And I said, well, there's always a first time for everything, Gary. Well, I went on and I worked, and I was working at the plant that Wayne was a manager at. And one day I was working in my job, and I just said, you know what? If I wait to my senior year, I don't have any leverage. I think and I got to have a heck of a year in my senior year. So I went and talked with Wayne in his office, and Wayne, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? He said, Randy, I think you can do it. He said, but now what it's going to depend on is if you got patience. He said, because sometimes, it don't work as fast as you think it does. You don't get that key to the new Chevy truck just because you show up. I said, what should I ask for? He said, you're not going to get a lot of money. It was August of 75. He said, you're not going to get a lot of money. But he said, what I can tell you is you get the incentive bonus, and you get an invitation to instructional league every year. I said, okay. So I went back to my apartment and got on the old telephone and called Gary Blaylock at the Royals Academy. And I called and I said, ma'am, is Gary Blaylock available? She said, well, who is this? And I said, this is Randy McGilberry. She said, Randy, hang on just a minute. She got on the microphone and called him in from the field and said, you have a very important phone call. He came in and we talked, and he said, well, Randy, I don't know how much I can give you, but I can guarantee you the incentive bonus, and I can guarantee you instructional league. And I said, you send me whatever you can, because it ain't about money anymore. It's about baseball. So I signed a contract for $3,500. Sent it back, showed up to instructional league. And I'll be honest with you, when you show up on a new job and you got all the workers out there that have been doing their job for maybe 4 or 5 years, and you're out there, Clint Hurdle, Willie Wilson, Dennis Leonard was there from the big leagues down there. I think he was either right after the season was over, and I don't think they made the playoffs that year. So it was probably right after the season was over. Dennis Leonard came down, and I met him. And that was another one of those guys, man. When you meet him, you go, gee whiz, man. What a nice guy. And he was full of information. And he and I threw a lot alike. Hard. I would say that me and Dennis were probably two of the hardest throwing Royals in the big leagues when I was there. There were a lot of guys that threw the ball hard in the minor leagues, probably threw harder than I did, but they couldn't control it.
Yeah.
I threw strikes. So I played I played that season, and Bill Fisher worked with me and taught me how to pivot. I was just straight back and straight at you. I looked like the old-timey pitcher. That's what my dad taught me. Bill Fisher worked with me, and I went from now, back in those days, they measured the fastball differently. They measured the fastball near the plate. Now they measure you there. You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So now they measure the fastball out of the hand. So nobody in the big leagues is throwing harder than we did. They just measure it differently. I was throwing the ball 91, 92 when I got to spring training. Instructionally, just plain Jane, like I grew up. Bill Fisher worked with me for 72 hours, and I felt it was embarrassing because he would take me over to the field, and I'd be on the field by myself doing that, and everybody else was doing the cycle on the 4 fields down there. And I felt like a complete fool. Here I am, I'm 22 years old, and somebody's teaching me how to pitch. But in 72 hours, I got to where my body was working with my arm, and I was using my whole body. I was following through to the plate. I went from throwing the ball 92 to 95, just like that. And the first time they realized how hard I had thrown was in an instructional game against the, we called them the Rat City Pirates. It was Dale Bear. Yogi Bear and John Shearholtz were sitting on a golf cart right behind the backstop. And John, I could see the judge gun sitting over the top of the car. I didn't pay any mind because I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking about, hey, I've learned how to throw a fastball, and I got some zip on this bad boy. And I just waved back and just let it fly. I didn't throw anything but fastballs. I struck out 2 batters and 1 grounded out. Then I go sit on the bench, and Bill Fisher came over to me and he patted me on the leg and he said, hey, you can go 1 more inning. I said, okay. So I get out there and, I throw the ball and it blows by a guy and he's swinging. He ain't close. And I look back and I saw Yogi Berra and John Shearholtz look at each other. And John just I saw him set the gun down on the cart. So I finished that inning. I think I struck out either 1 or 2 batters and got either a pop-up or a ground ball. Come out, and we had 2 days a week, we had to run 24 foul poles. And so Bill Fisher come over and popped me on the leg. He said, no, that's what I'm talking about. And I said, well, how'd I do? He said, well, I'll put it like this. They just clocked you. You touched 96 2 times. He said, you throwing the ball consistently 95. And when he told me that, I could have run 48 foul poles. I didn't care. So I went and ran my foul poles. I go into the dining room, I get supper, and I eat supper, dinner, whatever everybody calls it. I eat, and I go back to the dorm, and we had ponds right there in front of the complex. And somebody had come in and said, hey, Coach Blaylock wants you out by the pond. And I said, which one? He said, the only one. I said, okay. And I walk up, and Gary's standing there, and he's flipping out there, and he's fishing for bass. He knew I was standing there. He never looked back. He said, McGilberry. He said, you want to play pro ball? And I said, yes, sir. I said, I thought that's what I'm doing. He said, no, I mean in the major leagues. And I said, yes, sir. That's why I'm here. He said, tell you what, you want to be a relief pitcher? I said, Coach, I've been a starting pitcher and a relief pitcher and everything in between. I said, I pitched 3 or 4 days a week. I said, absolutely. Whatever y'all want me to do, just tell me. Well, that was in 75. That was the 76 season. So I go down to the minor leagues in 76, and I set the record, not the record, but I was the relief pitcher in the Southern League. I had 42 appearances, and I had good numbers with that. I had a lot of strikeouts. So that was 76. I spent the whole season down there with a guy by the name of Billy Scripture. You ever heard that name?
Again, that name.
Joe Garagiola.
He was the rookie league instructor, right, for the Royals at that time? Yeah.
He was actually AA.
AA, okay.
Yeah, I played for him. He's the one that could bite the cover off of a baseball, and he could twist a bat in two behind his back.
Jeez.
And I got to see him do that, but that's the man I played for. And son, he was solid as a stinking rock. But he was a hardtail, but he was a good guy. He was fair, and he loved me because all I want to do is have the ball in my hand. And my nickname is McGilla.
Yeah, I've seen that name quite a bit out there looking you up.
Yeah, so McGilla is my nickname, and his signal to me in the bullpen when he wanted me to get up was this. Can you see that? Wait a minute, hold on. He would do like this.
Like that?
No, he put his arms out, and let me stand up here where you can see me.
Okay.
He would do this. He'd flex his arms and do this. Yeah. Well, that was me. And to let you know, Dan Quisenberry and I were roommates. We were each other's first roommates in pro ball, and we were in the bullpen in Jacksonville. So he got me up one night, and in 76, and John Shulock. He was the only umpire that crossed the picket line back when the umpires struck. Well, he didn't umpire anymore after that, but John Shulock was umpiring, and he and John Shulock and he's fat as the side of a barn right now. But he's been in umpiring for 100 years. But he and Joe
West, Cowboy Joe West?
Yeah.
Okay.
So John and Joe were a team in the minor leagues, and they were hardtails, man. John was a cowboy. He always wore the boots, and he dressed up like a cowboy, and we always called him Dime Store. He didn't like that. But he was one of those guys that he'd break it off in you if he could. Joe West was a hardtail, but he was a little easier, a little bit more humorous than John. John, he took himself too serious. So we're out there playing, and if it rained in Jacksonville, if it rained at 3 o'clock, it'd be over by 5 o'clock, and you'd play ball. But if it started raining at 7 o'clock, it was going to rain you out.
Yeah, and
it was just flooding. Well, I got the signal, McGilla. I got up, I went out there, and it's pouring now. I'm on the mound, and I'm just throwing fastballs. Jimmy Godet was my catcher, and he's the other guy on the bubblegum car with me and Randy. Jimmy's catching, and I get mad. And when I used to tell him, if I ever put my glove over my face and pull it down, that means I want you to drop the mitt because I'm going to hit the umpire. And I threw one of my best fastballs and hit him right square in the mask. And he fell back on his butt, got mud all over him, and he was fussing at me. And then I told him 2 innings before, you need to stop this. Somebody's going to get hurt. And then I finally when it happened, they called timeout, clear the field. He come over and I'm sitting on the bench, and he got right between my legs and got in my face. And Joe West said, he came and got him. He said, you can't do that. So John Shulock walked away, and he said, I'm going to get even with you. And I said, they ain't made an umpire that can get even with me. You can call all you want, and you can screw me out there on that mound, but you can't take care of everything I'm going to do. And so we had a truce. Joe got fined $300, and I got fined $300. Well, I didn't even make $300. So anyway, they took it out in $25 increments or something like that. anyway, I pitched 76. We get through it, and I had a heck of a season. I came back to instructional league, and I really was. And I say this in all honesty, and I'm not boasting. I'm just stating the fact. I was as good as any pitcher they had in camp. And I could have been in AAA my first year. But they wanted me, they were going to send me to Waterloo.
Yeah.
And they were going to try. And when I found out they were going to send me to Waterloo, that's how I got Quiz as a roommate. You know, they had the list up in the cafeteria every morning. Who, if your name wasn't on the list, you're going home. But if it was on the list, then you'd see where they were sending you. Well, they had the last day, they had me going to Waterloo. And I saw that, and they were already out on the field. I walked into John Shearholtz's office, and I said, John, you got a minute? And he said, yeah, Randy, come on and sit down. I sat down, and I said, well, we won't be long. I said, I see you're sending me to Waterloo. He said, yeah. I said, I'm not going to Waterloo. He said, but I'll tell you this. He said, yeah, you're going to Waterloo. That's where we're going to send you. I said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. When I crank up my car and I leave here, I'm going to drive north. And when I get to this little town called Saraland, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go to work with my dad. He said, you can't do that. And I said, I can do anything I want. You don't own me. You just own my contract. And you do whatever you think you need to do. But if you send me to Waterloo, I promise you, I won't play a day in a Royals uniform. I had left his office and was walking out to the field. And I heard Billy Scripture say, McGilberry. Yes, sir. He said, you're going to Jacksonville, get you a roommate. Well, me and Quiz had hit it off big time. We were kind of one and the same. I said, all right. And I looked over at Quiz and I said, Quiz. He thumbs up. And it's a guy by the name of Dale Rovat, Hrovat. They sent him down, which is what they should have done anyway. And I told him, but that was the year I had such a great year in AA. But the other reason, that was where my incentive bonus started. Yeah. If I had 90 days in the AA, I got $1,500. No, $1,000. I got $1,000. And so I got my $1,000. I went home and spent the winter working for $17 a day as a substitute teacher at the worst schools in Mobile. Jeez. Just because I was a big guy, and that's all they wanted was just a big guy to intimidate the high school guys. So I did that. I went back to spring instructional league, and that's when I really saw that all I had to do was just continue doing what I was doing. So me and Quiz are sitting there one day, and before we can even get out on the field, they come and said, hey, y'all need to go down to Fort Myers. They need somebody to throw BP for them. And I thought, you don't call guys from AA down to Fort Myers just because you need somebody to throw BP. They got guys that can throw BP. I knew what we were going for. They wanted to look at me and Quiz because Quiz was a submariner and I was a hard throwing 3/4 guy.
Yeah.
And they got us down there. Galen Cisco was my pitching coach. And so we're on the practice field back behind the main field. And I'm throwing BP. And Galen said, Randy, you got a good fastball. He said, pop it a few times for me. And just so happened, I knew Darrell Porter. And Darrell was catching. And I was throwing to George Brett. Well, if Darrell told me to throw low and away a few times, I threw low and away because George was one of those guys, if he asked you to throw somewhere, just throw it there and let him hit. So I was throwing, and Galen said, all right, Randy, crank it up. So George Brett's there, and Galen said it loud enough that George heard it, and I cranked it up, and my ball ran. My ball would move, and I threw it, and it whipped him. And George said, throw that up there again. And it was up. It was probably about chest high. He said, throw that again. And I threw it outside and high. And he laced a line drive to right field like it was nothing. He said, that's what I thought. He caught it when it was moving, but he saw it move, and he swung, but he didn't come close to it. But he connected that second pitch. And so I threw him his batting practice, and we got going on. And Galen said, Randy, can you throw a breaking ball? And I said, well, what? I throw a curve, but it ain't very good. He said, well, have you ever thrown a slider? I said, what's a slider? He said, well, here. And he grabbed the ball and he showed me how to grip it. He said, now, I don't want you to flick your wrist. Don't do that. He said, put the pressure on your middle finger and throw it just like your fastball. So I did. And that thing broke about like that far. And I went, wow. That's a slider? And he went, yep. He said, throw it again. I threw it again. So then a guy gets in there. His name's Bobby Heiss. And Bobby was a utility ball player. He wasn't one of the big names.
No.
But he got in there, and Galen said, all right, Bobby, Randy's going to throw some fastballs. You get ready. Well, I was blowing his doors off. He couldn't touch me. And I was throwing it right down the chute. But my ball had zip on it. And like I said, I'm running the ball up there 95 in those days. To put it to modern days, 97, 98. So if they measured it from our hand, that's how hard I'd have been throwing. So anyway, he gets mad, and he said something. And Darrell Porter, he would take his fist and do that down low. He'd take his fist and do that. That meant let it fly. And I cranked up and I let go of probably the best fastball I've ever thrown. Don't know how fast it was, but it was fast enough that it moved so quick it came in on him. But it was a strike. He flipped his bat up and walked out. And Galen looked at him. He said, Bobby, when you can hit this guy, you might get in the starting lineup. And that was the end of that. Quiz got the throw. And all we were down there for, we were riding back and we were talking. And I said, Quiz, you know why we were there, don't you? He said, yeah, I got a pretty good idea. I said, we're going to be in the big league sooner than we think. So that was 77. So I thought, I pitched good enough in exhibition games. I should have broke with the team, but they didn't think I was ready. And you don't go from AA to the big leagues back in those days.
Yeah.
So I listen to what they're saying, go down there and just keep doing what you're doing. Started out in Jacksonville, man, I was tearing it up. All of a sudden, Billy Scripture walks in and says, McGilberry, you hitting the plane tomorrow, you're going to Omaha, Nebraska. I said, really? He said, yeah. And I said, well, I just put Roxy on a plane this evening before the ball game. He said, that's all right. He said, tell her you no longer play in Jacksonville. You're going to be in Omaha. So I go to Omaha, and I was blowing their doors off in AAA. So when Joe Burke had come down in August to watch UL Washington and Willie Wilson. And so we're playing against the Des Moines White Sox. Tony La Russa was the manager, and Baines and a bunch of those guys were there then. And I'm down in the bullpen. Well, John Sullivan gave me the same sign because Script called him and told him, said, when you want McGilberry up, just do this. So I look and I see Sully standing on the top step doing this. So I jump up. I went, daddy gum. So I get in the ball game. We're the bases are loaded. There's no outs, and we're winning by 1 or 2 runs. And I faced the middle of the lineup, and I threw 9 pitches and walked off the mound, and we won the ball game. I'm in the shower, getting soaked up, and Sully's over near me, and John Sullivan. I'm going to tell you something. The managers that I had in Kansas City's organization were some of the best managers I ever played ball for. They were good men. Gordy McKenzie, all those guys. So John walks up to me and says, McGilberry, you're going to the big leagues. And I looked at him and I said, well, hopefully if I have another couple of days like that, I'm going. And he said, no, you and UL are flying up to Kansas City tomorrow. And I said, are you kidding me? He said, if you don't believe me, go down to my office and ask Joe Burke. I literally went down there and asked him. I said, are we serious? He said, yes, sir. They only playing with UL. Y'all coming to Kansas City. And so I went from AA to AAA and the big leagues in my second season of baseball.
So when you got called up with UL, I mean, I'm guessing y'all flew together and everything.
Oh yeah,
down there. So what was that plane ride like? Like were y'all excited, giddy?
Well,
like,
see, I played with UL in AA,
yeah,
and in AAA. So me and UL were very knowledgeable of each other. And I knew that Oni Concepcion was going to be the AA shortstop, and then it wasn't long. UL got called to Omaha, and then here come Oni, and that was another superlative ball player. But yeah, UL and I were on the plane, and I mean we're giddy like a couple of kids in a sandbox. I mean that's what you're there for.
Yeah,
and man, your dreams all of a sudden. As a kid, all of a sudden you realize all that hard work was worth every ounce of effort that I put into it. UL and I were on the road. We were roommates most of the time. Every once in a while, we go to towns and everybody had their own room. But if they went to a place where you had roommates, UL and I were roommates. And I couldn't get used to and I hate to look away from you, but I'm gonna show. Well, I don't know if my computer will allow me. I'm on the bay in Pensacola, and all of my windows face the bay.
Oh
and
yeah,
I'm looking at a lightning storm going across the bay right now.
Those are awesome to see like that.
So basically, we get to Kansas City, we get our lockers, get our uniforms, and everybody's welcoming us because everybody knew who we were. We've been to spring training with them and all that. Well, I was kind of getting broke in. Me and Mark Littell hit it off like all get out. Of course, I knew Dennis Leonard, split off. I knew all of them. And it was that's probably as professional a bunch of guys as I've ever been around in my lifetime, all gathered doing the same thing, but they were businessmen. They were at a point in their career where they owned businesses or they owned a ranch or they owned something. But I got to be around Steve Busby, Paul Splittorff, Dennis Leonard, Larry Gura, geez, the Yankee killer. And these are guys that you're talking to them and they're treating you like you're one of the guys. They don't treat you like some guys. Al Hrabowski was bad about calling you rookie and all this stuff. And I wouldn't answer him. He'd call me rookie and I'd just ignore him. And he'd say McGilla. And then I'd talk to him. And he didn't like that. He thought he commanded that kind of respect. And if you don't respect me, I kind of dish it back.
Yeah.
Al was a good guy, but he had his head on backwards when I played with him. And he was starting to peter out in those days a little bit. That slapping his glove and walking up the mountain, that didn't work anymore.
Yeah.
But the guys that I played with, man, I mean, I played with Tom Poquette, Al Cowens, Amos Otis. He's from Mobile. I knew his brother, and his brother told me all about him. I was a kid riding around on a bicycle in Chickasaw, Alabama, and he was a Sears delivery guy, and he was delivering a stove to one of my neighbors, And I rode up on my bicycle, and I'd meet people and talk to them and everything. And I'd ride up and talking to him. He said, yeah. He said, well, do you play ball? And I said, yes, sir. I play baseball. He said, well, my brother plays baseball. You may have heard of him, Amos Otis. And I went, no. I said, I don't know who he is. And he said, well, he plays for the Mets. And I said, you mean the big leagues? And he said, yeah. I said, man, I'd love to meet him. And he said, well, if you keep playing hard, you may meet him one day. Well, crap. I met him one day, and I played with him for 2 years in every spring training. And not Amos Otis, Freddie Patek, Frank White, Big John Mayberry, Darrell Porter, John Wathan, George Brett. Man, we had a Willie Wilson, Clint Hurdle, and then the bullpen was Marty Patton, Doug Bird, me, Mark Littell, and I was blessed. I'll put it like that. I was blessed in my career to have been where I was when I was. I wished I could have played for big money, but you know what? Money wasn't the issue. It was putting that big league uniform on, like I had hanging on the door. Is putting that big league uniform on and walking out and hearing people calling you by name. I had a McGilla fan club. They had McGilla T-shirts on with the blue sleeves, the white body, and the guy's nickname was Pepsi, and he started the McGilla fan club. And I'll put it like this. The next season, I didn't break with the club in 78. But 77, I went over and played in Venezuela. And I got to play against Felipe Lu's team. I was in Caracas. I got to see Victor Cruz. He was on my team. I got to see all the guys that were big names over there. And they were big names here, but not like over there. And when you said Alou, everybody knew the Alous.
Yeah.
And if you were a Cruz, chances are everybody's going to know who you are.
Was Julio Franco there at that time?
I want to say he was. He's got to have been there. It was an umpire by the name of John Davidson or Bob Davidson. He was over there because umpires got to go over there too. And I did that. But I'm going to tell you, that's where I learned how fortunate we are in this country.
I was going to ask, what was that experience like just being in Venezuela?
You know, I grew up in Saraland. Well, Saraland, as opposed to Mobile, was kind of rural, but it was still a suburb. Down there was no middle class. You were either rich or you were poor.
Yeah. And
there wasn't no tweeners. And we lived in downtown Caracas for about 3 or 4 months. A completely different environment. I mean, you know, you saw where the truck driver tried to cross the interstate and kill 3 people in Florida. Well, he probably grew up driving trucks down in some foreign country where he came in from. And down there, you didn't have to have a license or anything. You just drove. And it was first come, first serve. Whoever got to the intersection first was the winner. And it might be 10 cars racing to that point. But that was an experience that told me, you know, Randy, you came up lower middle class in America, but you would be wealthy compared to these people. And so we did that. Roxy came home after right before Christmas, and I spent another month down there and came on home. John Sullivan was down there with me. Willie Wilson, Mark Daly, I believe, left-handed pitcher. He was there. There were a lot of Americans there. They didn't like us, but we were there. So the next season, I go to spring training. I have a great spring training. That's where I met the kid that was the bat boy for the Yankees. So I have a great season. I get to go on 2 road trips with them. Usually, if you weren't going to break with them, you weren't going to make road trips. But they took me on a road trip, and I pitched one time against the Rats. I pitched against Willie Stargell
Wow.
and what was the right fielder's name? Shoot, how do you forget that?
I mean, it wasn't Clemente by that time. Parker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just got inducted.
I got to throw against both of those guys, and I'm gonna tell you something. Those are big men.
Yeah.
But they wanted to see how I'd handle big left-handers. That had to be what it was, because they waited until that moment to put me in the ball game, and I did well. I got Stargell out on the ground. He topped a slider and hit a ground ball and was thrown out. And Dave Parker hit one of the, I believe it's got moon dust on it. He hit one of the longest pop up. I believe I lost sight of it, and Al Cowens caught it, but it came down about 15 feet behind the dirt. It looked like it was going to go over the fence, and then I saw Al start racing in, and he caught it about 15 yards behind the dirt. And but when we get back, I didn't get to break with him, so I went to Omaha. Well, it wasn't long after that. I forgot when it was. It was either June, maybe July, but I can't remember. But I was called up, and I finished the season with the Royals there. Actually got pulled off the playoff roster the day of the first game against the Yankees in '78. I was pissed.
Yeah, I was gonna ask how that.
And they wanted Steve Busby to dress out. Steve had been in Sarasota all season long, and Joe Burke told me, he said, we feel like we owe it to Steve to let him. He said, Randy, chances of you pitching may or may not be, but we feel like Buzz could do a better job with his experience and everything. And I told Joe, and I said, well, Joe, he said, we want you to go to New York, and we want you can't go in the dugout, but you can sit in the family part of the stand. And I said, well, Joe, I'll tell you what, I appreciate it, but when y'all break to go to New York, Randy McGilberry is going to Mobile. He said, well, Randy, I don't think you ought to do that. And I said, well, Joe, it really don't matter to me what you think. I think I ought to be on that playoff team, but you made your choice. I've been up here all season. He's been in Florida all season. I said, I understand it, but I don't agree with it. And I said, so I'll be going to Mobile. Well, I did. I went to Mobile. I got married and flew to Venezuela. Flew to Santo Domingo. And I played winter ball in Santo Domingo. I came back, and, everybody expected me to get released. Well, they weren't going to release me because I got picked up in a heartbeat. So they just invited me back to spring training, paid me the big league minimum, which I was already making. And in '77, I collected 7,500 of my. So in Omaha, I got 1,500, and I got 7,500 for spending all 270 days in the big leagues and AAA, and so I got my not 90, 60. And really, that's what helped put me over and give me a little bit of a pension plan. It's not called pension, but I get it anyway. So I finished that season out, and come home, go to spring training again, break in 80 or 79, and don't make it back to the big leagues. In 80, I go to spring training. They wanted me to replace Doug Bird as a spot starter. So I started starting games in the season in 80. I was doing real well, and we were in Denver, and they were going to call me up that night. And they should have called me up and not ever let me leave the hotel. But I separated my shoulder in warm-ups. And you know how everybody gets loose before the ball game. I get out there and I had a slight separation in my shoulder. I missed getting called up my third time, which would have froze me. I'd have been in the big leagues until somebody bought my contract. So as I say, as God would have it, that was just what happened. I wasn't mad at anybody, but they traded me to the Mets. After I got back full speed, I was still throwing the ball hard. My arm was starting to give me a little bit of trouble, and they traded me to the Mets, the club I really didn't want to play ball for. So I go to AAA, and I'm playing with Hubie Brooks, Mookie Wilson, Juan Bear, Mike Scott. I mean, we had an all-star team in AAA. And so I go through the season and I do a good job. And I mean, I could still hold my own. But after the season, I asked for my release because Montreal Expos wanted me. And Galen Cisco was with them at that time. He said, Randy, if you can get your release, I'm going to pick you up and we're going to put you in Denver to start with and bring you up from there. I said, okay. So I called and asked the Mets for my release, and they wouldn't release me. So they wanted me to go to Jackson and be the pitching coach for the AA team.
Oh, wow.
Because they said, Randy, we know you know what you're doing. We just think that you're to the point now where your arm's going to start. We want you in our organization. And I turned down big league money in Jackson, Mississippi, right here in home. And I turned it down and I just went to work and started chasing my second love, which was drafting and engineering. So there you have my career in a nutshell.
Well, thanks for that, but I got a bunch of questions for you I want to ask you about. So I do want to go back real quick. I believe you made your debut against the A's. Manny Sanguillen was your first at-bat, the first guy you faced?
Manny Sanguillen.
What was that like? What was your debut like? Because I know you never started. You always got called into relief.
Yeah, so. I struck him out.
Yeah.
I might have thrown maybe 3 or 4 pitches, 4 or 5 pitches to him, but I struck him out I watched him, and Steve Busby told me, he said, Randy, you can throw that slider, but he said, climb the ladder. Every once in a while, climb the ladder. They know you're going to throw a slider, but climb the ladder a little bit. So there was my first pitch. The first guy I faced is one of the biggest power hitters in the game. And so I fanned him with a high slider, and that was my first major league strikeout, my first batter. And that was a high moment for me. Here I am, I'm in the big leagues, and my first major league batter is a strikeout.
So an all-star nonetheless, too.
Yes.
All-star pitcher, yeah.
So that was what that was like.
And you only played 3 games that year, so you played in Oakland, and do you remember the other 2 places you went to?
I think I pitched maybe in Seattle.
Seattle?
Maybe. I think maybe Seattle, and I know I pitched there in 78. I'm trying to think. I know I pitched against the A's at home, and I pitched against did I pitch against the Angels? I don't think so. I'm trying to remember who I pitched against. I don't know, to be honest with you. I'd have to literally look it up.
Well, no worries.
But I was there for the month of September.
Okay.
And that was 77. I got married in 77, not 78. I got married in 77. So I'm trying to think who else I threw against, man. It's a blur. I just remember my first strikeout. And
so, like, would you say that was your favorite moment from your MLB, your time in the MLB?
No.
What was do the moment that sticks out to you the most then?
I pitched 4 innings against Doug Bird was spot starter, and he came in and started on it was either a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. It might have been a Saturday afternoon. He started against the Minnesota Twins. And, Minnesota, Rod Carew,
Yeah.
they were awesome.
Lyman Bostock, was he there at the time?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. No, Lyman was with the Angels in those days.
Okay, yeah, because he was the first big free agent. That's right.
Yeah. And I want to say, I know in 78 he was with them because Al Hrabosky threw over his head and caused a big fight with that. But we were playing the Twins, and Doug got knocked out in the first. I think maybe I came in the 3rd inning or 4th inning. I can't, but I pitched 4 innings against them, and I think they got Rod Carew hit a seed off of me, but it was right at UL, and it went between the wickets, and they gave him a hit on it. It went right between his legs, but he said the ball was knuckling when it came at him. And I told him, I said, man, I don't care. I said, I got to throw against Rod Carew. And because Rod Carew and George Brett, to me, were the best hitters in baseball in those days. And so I pitched 4 innings against them, and I think I may have given up like maybe a couple of hits. I think later that year, or somewhere in that year, I pitched in against Toronto Blue Jays, and Rico Carty had been with the A's, and then we go up and we're playing in Toronto, and now he's a Toronto Blue Jay, and he yelled when he swung. He had a bodacious yell. It scared the crap out of me the first time I heard it, because I was sitting in the bullpen and I could hear him. And it sounded like, I thought maybe he had hurt himself. He hollered every time he swung the bat. And he swung from Texas all the way up through Nebraska, man. I mean, he got a full stinking swing. But the best time I had was the 4 innings I pitched against the Twins, and showed that I could carry my own. And I think that impressed them to the point. And that's why it just struck me. And that was in 78. And that's why I was disappointed that they pulled me off the roster, because I had proven myself. But man, there was a span where I went 21 days without getting in a game.
Yeah.
And I thought, how do you, as a matter of fact, we were in Cleveland, and Galen told me, said, Randy, get up and get you some work in. You're not going to pitch tonight. And I got up, and Darrell Porter was in the bullpen with Watham was catching that day. And we're down there, and, that's Brown Stadium. That was a humongous stadium. And they had 10,000 people there, and it was like a postage stamp on a letter. It didn't look like there was anybody there. So I get up, and I'm on the mound, and I'm just sitting there just throwing the crap out of the ball. I didn't care, and I was mad. All of a sudden, I'm winding up, and I look, and I see Galen standing between me and Darrell, and I stopped. And he said, now, Randy, I'm going to tell you this one time. You either get your work in and do it like you're supposed to, or you come sit your butt down and you can go to Omaha tomorrow. I said, yes, sir. So I went back to doing what I should have been doing. And after the ball game, he came over to my locker and he sat down with me, and he told me, he said, listen, Randy, nobody knows any more about how lonesome that is than I do. I've been there too. He said, there's a lot of pitchers that have been in your shoes. He said, guys sitting there knowing that they're good enough to be on that hill, but they're not getting that shot. He said, Whitey's the manager of this team. And he said, as long as Whitey pulls you in, that's Whitey's decision. He'll ask me what I think. And what he's doing is he's trying to put you in a situation where you can do your thing. And he said, but there'll be a time when he's going to put you in when it means a difference. He said, but give him enough respect that he knows what he's doing. And but that was my most notable appearance. Now, good times and fun and good people. So go ahead with your next question.
All right. Well, going back to the managers you mentioned, two of them that you had, Gordon McKenzie and John Sullivan, they were both former catchers in the MLB. One thing I've always been curious about, because I know catchers, in my opinion, make the best managers. I mean, they see the game from all kinds of angles, and they have to pay attention to many different things that go on in it.
Right.
As a pitcher, when you had a former manager as a catcher, was that different from having a manager who played, say, just a regular other position, or was it pitcher themselves because they, can tell you what they've seen from pitchers that they worked with?
I never gave it a second thought. He was my manager. He was a good guy. John knew what he was doing. He was a good manager because, there are people that manage people that people will work for, but they don't want to work for them.
Yeah.
And then there's managers that everybody wants to work for. And John Sullivan, Gordy McKenzie, who was my last manager before I got traded? Man, that's bad. But Billy Scripture, Jose Martinez, Steve Boris, every coach, every manager, Dennis Papke, and Jerry Cram had pitched in the big leagues, but he was down, and he was kind of like he was still a pitcher, but he was a pitching coach. I literally believe that the minor leagues were blessed with a ton of good managers in those days that were on their way up. They were on their way. And John Sullivan was one of those guys. He wasn't a smart aleck. He was respectful, but he said what he thought. And he was, if you made him mad, he let you know, hey, don't ever do that again. And, I respect him enough that I didn't question his authority. But he was a pleasure to play for. Gordy McKenzie, another one of those guys that they were baseball ambassadors, and they didn't have to demand their respect. They got it because they earned it. And they had a temperament about them. They understood what you were dealing with. They understood your angst. They understood your heartbreak. They understood every bit of it. And you had to give them credit for seeing that. I'm going to give you, I know you're going to ask me about Gary Blaylock, but I will tell you this. We were in Evansville, Indiana. I was playing AAA ball, Omaha. As a matter of fact, the night that this happened, Kirk Gibson made it to AAA with the Detroit Tigers. It was his first game to play in pro ball. And I'm sitting in my room. I didn't do a whole lot. I stayed in the room. I always kind of relaxed because you never knew when you were going to be called to action. And I'd always, I don't know, a few hours before the ball game, I'd always just lay on the bed, turn on some music, and just listen to music and just relax. Well, I'm sitting there in the bed, and I'm not having a good day because I felt like I should have been in the big leagues. And I heard a knock on the door. And I got up and went to the door, and Gary Blaylock was standing there. And he said, Randy, Joe, I almost thought of Joe's last name. He was my last manager, but Gordy McKenzie was my manager. And he walked in, and he said, Randy, Gordy called me today. He's worried about you. He said, if he's worried about you, I'm worried about you. I said, where'd you come from, Gary? He said, well, I'm about 100 miles off the track that I was going to. But he said, it's important enough for me to come and do this. So he sat down on the corner of one bed and I sat on the other one. And he said, what's going on? And I said, I deserve to be in the big leagues. He said, I agree. He said, be patient. He said, be patient. And this was 78 now. I want to say Gordy was there in 78. I think he was. So at 78, I went to the ballpark. Gibson was playing. I didn't pitch that night. But they had an all-star team, too, in AAA. Man, those guys were stacked. And I think the Fidrich was trying to make a comeback that year. I think it was 78.
Yeah, that'd been around after his injury.
Yeah. So Kirk Gibson's, geez, that guy could fly. He's a big guy, but that son of a gun could run, man.
Yeah. I'm a football player at Michigan State.
Yeah. So, I got to meet him and everything. A good guy. He was a nice guy to be around because there's not a whole lot of places to go in Evansville, Indiana. Well, so anyway, Gary had really I needed that. And Gary had enough about him, and and I made him proud by doing what he asked me to do and getting that opportunity. And I owed it to him. And it wasn't long after that I was back in the big leagues. But he told me to be patient. He said, I told you when we were standing at that pond, you got to be patient. He said, you're going to get your shot. And so he reminded me, he said, I told you, be patient. And he called me up when I got there. He called me up and I went to the phone in Al Zeke's office. And he said, I just wanted to congratulate you. He said, I know I wanted you back then to come up too. He said, I kept pushing and kept pushing. He said, but you're there and go do what they pay you to do. But Gary was just a gentleman. There's very few guys I met like Gary or anybody that was a assistant coach or even, we called him T-Bone, Roy Tanner. Roy Tanner was a rookie league coach, but some of the nicest guys you could ever want to play ball for. And, we lost John. We lost Bill Fisher. Gary's still alive. But I went and saw Galen Cisco. I called him up. He and I talk every so often. I called him up one day 2 years ago, and I said, do you mind if I come up and visit you? And he went, well, no. I knew his wife had passed away. And he said, well, no, I don't mind at all. He said, I'd love to have you. And he said, but why would you come visit me? And I said, well, why wouldn't I? I said, Galen, all I knew that you were a coach and you were a fantastic guy, but I didn't get to know you personally because coaches and players didn't do that. I said, so I want to come up and get to know the guy that taught me how to throw a slider and got me in the big leagues. And he said, well, you just come on up. And I went up and spent 3 days with him. What a career he had. Now, that's a guy you ought to interview.
Yeah, I'd love to.
He's got memorabilia that, man, I'm telling you, he had a room about this size, and it was full of memorabilia that he collected with Toronto, Kansas City, as a player when he was playing. And if I had it all to do over with again, I couldn't have asked God. I couldn't have prayed for a better situation than I had when I had it. Yeah, these guys are making a boatload of money nowadays, and really, a lot of them aren't they're not worth the check it's written on. But what I got an opportunity to do was play with a lot of old timers that were starting to fade out of the game, a lot of newcomers that were rookies just like I was, and then some of the guys after us that were coming in. But I got to be at the edge of the old gang and the beginning of the new gang, and watched all the old gang turn into coaches and managers and all that, and general managers. And I got to know a lot of them just by being on the field. You couldn't fraternize with ball players back then. Now, I will tell you one of the funniest things that ever happened. Two funny things I'll tell you. I'm on the mound in Fort Myers. I'm throwing against the Yankees. And that was the first year when, what's his face? He was the left-hander, the one that had the drug problems that played with the Royals, first baseman.
Oh, Aikens?
Yes.
Yeah.
Willie Mays Aikens, it was his first spring training with us. He was on first base. I was on the mound. Reggie Jackson was at the plate. And I threw an inside slider, blew him off. Then I threw a sinker. Well, not a sinker. I just threw my fastball and it ran for strike 2. Well, I was 0-2 on Reggie Jackson. So Darrell Porter calls up and in. And he said, and when he did it, he went like that. And so I threw up and in, took it. And so Darrell reached out and wanted that fastball away again. So I popped it out there and missed the plate. So I'm going to throw a slider. Well, I hung the slider. Reggie Jackson hit the ball. If it had been back at me, it would have killed me, and I'd have never known what killed me. But instead, it was a line drive. I want to say, I can't remember if it was Pinella. I can't remember who was on. There was a runner on first base that had been walked, and that's why I got called in. Willie Mays Aikens is playing, I don't know, about 2 or 3 steps behind him. He catches a line drive, and it hits him in the head, and he reaches out and tags the runner because everybody froze. So I'm walking off the mound, and I'm walking into the dugout. Whitey said, "Hey, kid, had him all the way." And I thought, yeah, right. So there's actually 3 stories. So I'm pitching in another game against the Pirates in Fort Myers. And, oh, shoot, I can't think of his name. Lee.
Lacey?
Huh?
Lee Lacey?
No, his last name was Lee.
Okay. For the Pirates.
I can't think of it right now, but anyway, I had never thrown a changeup, didn't even know how to throw one. And I decided I was going to throw a changeup. So I kept waving Darrell off, waving him off. And he finally wiggled his 4 fingers, and I shook my head. And then all of a sudden, everything I did was in slow motion. Lee May.
Okay, yeah.
Lee May hit that ball 9,000 feet. George Brett said, "Hail a taxi." And he didn't even turn. Brett just said, "Hail a taxi." Whitey Herzog walked out to the mound. He said, "Hey, kid, what was that pitch?" And I said, "It was a changeup." He said, "Can it?" Turn around and walk back to the dugout. He said, "Don't throw that again." And the third story that I had was Jimbo Mason. Jimbo Mason is a Mobile guy. I've known Jimbo all my life. But Jimbo's playing for the Yankees. And they're in town. And it was the trip they made into town, I want to say in July or something like that. It wasn't their last trip in town. So I'm out there, and I see Jimbo walking up behind the backstop, the batting cage. And I jump up and then walk out there and start talking to him. And, "Hey, man, how you doing? Good to see you." And all of a sudden, everything got real quiet. And Jimbo said, "Randy, you probably need to go on back to your dugout." And I turned around and looked. Reggie Jackson was in the batting cage, and he had the bat up under his hip, and he was standing there with his hand on his other hip looking at me. So I go back to the dugout, and I he's always got 1 foot down and 1 foot up on the step, and he's got his arm on his knee and his head propped up. I walked by him and he said, "Well, kid, how'd that work out for you?" Cost me $300. I could pay it then. So those are my 3 humorous stories that come to mind immediately, because it was just a rookie thing to do. It was just rookie.
Well, I do want to go back to Dan Quisenberry real quick, because
Yes,
I've
sir.
heard you talk a lot about how he was also just your best friend in baseball.
Yes,
in general. And I mean, my experience knowing who that guy was, collecting baseball cards as a kid, I found out he was one of the top relievers of the 80s. But what I've learned in recent years, just learning about the dude, was, one, we lost him way too early. He was way too young.
Yes.
But 2, he was a very thoughtful guy. I don't think most people know he was a poet outside of baseball, and his poetry was quite beautiful.
He was deep.
Yeah. So I wanted to take a moment and ask you, so could you tell our listeners, what was Dan Quisenberry like as a person?
Dan Quisenberry and I, we hit it off, and I, he's kind of quirky. And he was laid back, and he didn't have any bad habits or anything. He was just an all around good person. And we met in what am I trying to say? The fall ball. We met down there in instructional league, and in spring training, we just kind of hit it off. We were roommates in the old dorm they had there. And he wasn't married yet, and he drove an old Datsun B210 truck. And I had bought me a sports car with that $3,500. And so Dan and I just hit it off, and we did everything together. Every once in a while, I'd go out drinking with the guys and stuff, and Quiz didn't get into that. He was a stay-at-home guy and write and read. And so when they sent me to AA, well, he and I were roommates, and we split a condo or apartment. And together, we both made $500 gross pay a month. We cleared every 2 weeks $171. And we had a Dairy Queen in the apartments right by us. And we had a Thunderbird Inn, is what they called it. It was Thunderbird Inn, but it was like a breakfast joint and dinner and stuff like that, kind of low end, but it was still a nice place. And we go there for breakfast every morning. So, but we could only eat one big meal per paycheck. And then what we depended on was, I depended on Quiz would give me his beer after every ball game. I would always make sure I had some kind of soda or something for him. And, but we'd go home, and one night he would sleep in the bed and I'd sleep on the couch, and then I'd sleep in the bed the next night and he would sleep on the couch. We washed our clothes in the bathtub and we dried them out, hanging them up on doors. We didn't have a whole lot of clothes. So I might have had 3 pairs of jeans and about 20 shirts, and most of them were t-shirts. So me and Quiz, we had to pay $50 a month for rent each. We had to pay for the electric bill, which was roughly about $15 a month each. We ate one big meal at the Dairy Queen, which was about, back in those days, $3 or $4 for a big meal. And then the rest of the time we'd probably, mom and dad would either buy us a big old thing of ribeyes and stick them in the freezer, and we'd do that. And I got a picture of all of us sitting around in that apartment, my first place to live. And Quiz didn't get in the picture, but everybody else was in it. And then a guy by the name of Billy Pascal signed with us, and he came to live with us. So then we got a break. We actually got 2 meals out of each paycheck from Dairy Queen. But Billy came in, I don't know, I think it was probably later in the season. But Quiz was one of those kind of guys that had some of the most unique thoughts, and he'd just burp them out, and you'd go, what made you think of that? And he would tell you, oh, yeah, I was watching this and watching that. And he said, if you think about it, and I mean, he provoked a lot of thought by saying stuff that was kind of like, at first you'd kind of like back off and look at him. But I got to where I called them quizenisms. And it got to be a term around. I said, well, what's the latest quizenism? And he'd come up with something, and I'd go, well, that's one you hadn't told me before. I said, I never heard him tell me the same thing twice. And we roomed together in AA and in AAA. And a matter of fact, when he got called up, he, Janie, me, and Roxy had gone to the show in Omaha. We went to see a movie, and I don't even know what it was. We get back to the apartment, and back in those days, you still had landlines, and my phone was ringing off the hook. So I walk over, and I say, hello, and I heard the voice. I knew who it was. It was John Shearholtz. He said, Randy, is Quiz with you? I said, as a matter of fact, John, yes, he is. He's right here. And I handed Quiz the phone. I said, you're going to the big leagues. And I handed him the phone. Next day, he was going to the big leagues, and he never looked back.
Wow.
But Quiz and I connected all the time. I mean, we sent their kids Christmas gifts, and they sent our kids Christmas gifts. And Janie, her and Roxy would write letters to each other, and me and Quiz, every once in a while, I might talk to him. But a lot of times I would just write something in Roxy's letter to him. But it broke my heart when I read that he was suffering with a brain tumor. And I didn't, when I finally heard it, I was sitting, I had an office in my house in those days. And I was sitting there, and I was in shock. I mean, probably one of the best friends I ever had was gone. And I mean, he was the epitome of a guy that could live that dream out and make the most of it and enjoy every stinking minute of it. I might have heard a negative out of him every once in a while, but most of the time he was upbeat and everything was positive because he got the bigger picture. He understood it long before a lot of us did. And he was a very God-minded guy. And I'll be honest with you, his death really, it made a difference in me because he and Darrell Porter were the only ones I talked to out of that area. And Darrell would call me up every once in a while and say, hey, man, I got a boat and we got a lake. When you come and go and fishing with me? I used to fish with him when I was in Kansas City. And it just broke my heart because Quiz was the kind of guy that you couldn't dislike him if you tried to. There was nothing about him not to like. He was a very dependable guy. He was a very consoling guy. And so that's my rendition of Quizenism memories.
Well, since you brought Darrell Porter up too, I just want to ask you, because he's one of those guys that came from a generation really where there was a lot of really good catchers. You had Johnny Bench, of course, he was the best.
Yeah.
Manny Sanguin, Bob Boone.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on and on. But what was having Darrell Porter as your catcher like? Like, was he great defensively? Could he call a game good? I'm not too familiar with him.
I can put it like this. The night that I got, or the day that I got there, he lived in the Holiday Inn right across the road. He said, Randy, I got you a room already. He said, we're going to go over to, I forgot what they call it, the scoreboard lounge. That was the name of the lounge in the Holiday Inn. He said, we're going to go to the scoreboard. We're going to have a couple of drinks, and then we're going to go talk baseball. And my room was right next door to his room. And he said, come on in. Now, he took his weed. I didn't care one way or the other. And when he had on a pair of shorts and we were sitting there talking, he had his shirt off, man, he was beat up. He was a big bruise. And I just never said anything to him about it because it wasn't for me to tell a guy that's been in the big leagues what to do. And I wasn't going to shun him. We talked pitching and catching. And he said, what do you like to throw the most? And I said, I got a tailing fastball. He said, Randy, he said, in spring training, your ball explodes to the plate. He said, it jumps to the plate. He said, so you like throwing your fastball? And I said, yeah, I can throw it anywhere I need to. If it's moving, just let me know what it's doing, and I'll adjust. He said, no, you just throw the ball. He said, do you throw the slider very much? And I said, I don't throw it a whole lot. I said, because I rely on my fastball. Anyway, Darrell was probably the best mentor I had because we talked it. He would take me fishing, and we would talk pitching and catching the whole time. Randy, if you face this guy, he said, I'm going to tell you the best hitters in baseball that you may face because of what your job is. He said, and I'm going to tell you how to pitch them. He said, just get it in your head. We're going to talk this, and until you can tell me what to throw somebody, we're not going to quit talking about it. That's all we talked about. Every once in a while, he'd have a hot-looking chick show up, and she would, and I'm talking about they were hot-looking chicks, and they'd show up, and they didn't mind bearing it off. They would just come out and get in the boat with us, and I'm just kind of like, I was raised in Saraland. I'm a good old Baptist raised boy, you know. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this and I'm going, wow, big league baseball, huh? He said, man, just don't pay any mind to it. He said, just go on and fish, man. I said, wait a minute, Darrell, seriously? But he was probably in my head more asking me questions. Okay, now I've taught you, now tell me this. You're going to face Reggie Jackson. What are you throwing? I said, well, I don't throw him a hanging slider. He said, that's right. Don't throw a hanging slider. He said, well, and he would just do that to me the whole time. But when we went fishing, you know, it got to the point where he got tired of asking me questions because I could answer them. And then we fished and we'd talk about, hey, tell me about how you were raised. But Mark Littell was another guy that I got close to in the bullpen. And we talked about old country boy living. I was a country boy compared to Mobile, but he was definitely a country boy. And I've been in about 4 or 5 books that have been published with my stories about the individuals the books were written about, because my stories they had some meat to them. But I can tell you, man, Darrell, his biggest problem was he would speed to play and he would down her to sleep. And, you know, I was offered all kinds of drugs. I wasn't a druggie. I said, guys, I don't need anything to pep me up, and I sure don't need anything to put me to sleep. I said, I don't have a problem with either one of them. And oh man, but this will give you a lot of energy. I'm going, it may, but guys, I came up here with energy. And that's the way I handle it. But did I have opportunities? Oh yeah. But I stayed away from it because they didn't really drug test people back then, but if they suspected you, they would. And I just didn't want to put, you know, that was my career, man. But I didn't say anything to Darrell about it because I just tried to understand. The guy was in pain. I mean, he had tendonitis from the very first day of spring training through the whole season and could still throw a baseball harder back to me than I could throw it to him. But his heart was as big as Texas. Yeah. He was another fine guy. He messed up.
Well,
and it cost him his life.
I'm glad I asked you about him because what you just said, I mean, I don't think that's a side of Darrell Porter most people know about.
No, he cried. I'll tell you what, Jim, oh, he used to be a catcher. Used to
Sunberg.
Huh?
Sunberg?
No. It was older Jim. They had a group that would go around the spring training camps, and they would try to get guys to go to the rehab center in Phoenix. Okay. And but it was and I got my hometown hero. I always dreamed of getting Roger Merritt. I thought he was the greatest player I ever thought about. And I actually walked up to him and got his autograph while I was in the big leagues. And I've still got that ball to this day, man. But they came through, and I remember they had to talk with the clubhouse guys and everybody in there. Darrell come over, and his eyes were just red as beets, man. He come and he laid his head on my shoulder and hugged me. I honestly thought he was trying to pull the breath out of me. He told me, he said, man, I'm going. That's when he went to rehab. And but he came to me because I'd always stuck by him, and I always, I was always there for him. And I went to the funeral, and I saw Jerry Terrell there, and Horboski and several of the other guys that played with the team. And on the way home is when I heard the announcement that they'd gotten the drug report back, and that he had overdosed and had taken his life. And I hated to hear it. I didn't want to hear it, but I kind of figured it to be that. But man, he had built such a good reputation for himself, and he was kind of living a double life, but he just couldn't shake that habit. And it broke my heart because, there's times when he'd invite you up and you go, I wonder if he was trying to get me up there because he was having a problem. And I look back on those days, and I should have taken him up on it because I could have gone up there. But Darrell was a good man. In his heart, he was a good man and a heck of a ball player. The guy could, whew. I remember I hit him. I threw two in the dirt, and one of them hit him in the forearm. And that picture I sent you where I'm in my pitching motion.
Yes, sir.
If you look real close, you'll see that flesh tone elastic tape around my wrist. I had jammed my wrist, and I hit him in the arm, and he threw a fastball back to me, and I had to catch it right here. And I'm talking about it had some heat on it. I just grabbed my arm like that, and he come out to the mound, and he said, you know what? I knew that was what I was trying to do, is get you to understand it hurts. And he said, quit throwing the ball 50 feet. Throw the darn thing 60 feet. So I learned to throw a ball a little bit up after that. But Darrell was he was probably my second best friend in baseball.
Well, I'm glad I asked you about that then. So I've taken a lot of your time, Randy, and I'll have one more thing for you. But I just want to thank you again for doing this, and I hope I can have you on again soon.
You just tell me when you want to talk, and we can talk about it. I got a lot of stories.
Well, we'll end it with this since you brought it up, because it's kind of like what Billy Sample ended it with meeting Brooks Robinson. What was meeting Roger Maris like?
Well, as a kid, I didn't get to see the home run, but I got to see the news reports of the home run. And he was, the reason I liked him is because he was a very humble individual. And I never saw a picture of him or anything in like a newsreel that he didn't show his humbleness. And so, it was always my dream to meet him. Well, here he comes, Don Newcomb. That was the catcher. he came in, and I walked over to him with a brand new baseball, and I said, "Mr. Maris, I've been a fan of yours for many years." I said, "I watched you on TV," and I said, and I just want your autograph." He signed the ball to Randy Roger Maris, and he started to hand it to Mickey Mantle, and I said, "No, no, 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 no." I grabbed it. I grabbed the ball. I didn't want anybody else's autograph. I took it back and put it behind stuff in my locker, and I'm standing there, and I'm fixing to go out and play. And I feel somebody's presence. I just feel somebody's there. And I turn around, and it's Roger Maris. And in the clubhouse, we had picnic tables and big ice boxes that held juices and stuff like that. And he came over and he said, "Come here, man. Let's sit down and talk." We didn't talk but for about maybe 10 minutes because he knew I had to get out on the field. He never said anything about himself. He asked me about me. He said, "Where'd you grow up at?" And I said, "Near Mobile, Alabama." He said, "I played ball with a lot of guys from Mobile." And he said, "Why am I your hero?" And I told him, I said, you're a guy that you don't act like you are God's gift to baseball. You act like God gave you a gift of baseball." And he said, "Well," he said, I appreciate that." But he said, "Yeah, he said, look, you're in the big leagues." I said, "It was always a dream of mine too." But I said, "Getting that autographed ball means more than me being in this big league uniform." And he said, "Well, I appreciate that." And he said, "I know you got to go, but I just wanted to come over and speak to you because," he said, "those other guys were just kind of flabbergasted that you didn't want their autograph." And I said, "I didn't." I said, "Yours is the only one that I have waited all these years to get. And I've still got the ball."
Well,
And
thank you for all of that, Mr.
yes, sir.
McGilberry. And God bless you. And if there's anything else you'd like to say.
I just appreciate the opportunity to give back because, I work with kids around here, and I've worked with several kids for free, and I have a baseball business. I think I sent you the link. I
Yes,
have
sir.
a baseball business, and what I do is I do free camps for kids. I get the community leaders and businesses to sponsor it. But I have a business. I want every kid that wants to come to a camp and learn something, I want to do it for them. And
What's
so
the name of that camp, sir?
Huh?
And what's the name of that camp?
It's called Pro Instruct. And I do youth camps, and I do them anywhere that somebody wants to do them. And I raise the money through the businesses of the communities, and I want the communities and the coaches in that community to be a part of that. It's a 3-hour camp. It's modeled a little bit like the big leagues, but I changed it up because I think there ought to be more in a camp than just big leaguers. I think there ought to be some college guys and some minor league guys to show these kids what they're trying to get to.
Yeah.
So that I changed mine up to be free and to have more than just big league ball players there.
Well, I'll make sure to include a link to that in the description for this video and whenever I post it as well.
Right.
But with that, I'll go ahead and end this recording. Thank you again, Mr. McGilberry, and thank everyone out there for listening.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Stratton Davis, and over and out. Oh, let's see. Okay. Stop recording.